Hello everyone, nice to see you. The past week can be called an unprecedented one in terms of US-China relations. Why do I say so? I'll talk about this after some news update. Heavy rain has battered central and southern China over the past few weeks, causing widespread flooding. A third wave of severe flooding, referred to as the number 3 flood, hit Chongqing on July 27th, causing an ancient 1,000-year-old town in Chongqing to be flooded. Let's take a look.
Starting on July 26, another wave of severe flooding, the number 3 flood of 2020, formed along the Yangtze and Jieling rivers. And on the 27th, it hit Chongqing, causing severe damage. This included the ancient 1,000-year-old section of Jiku on the Jieling River. By 10 a.m., the water level exceeded the warning level by more than 3 meters, flooding many streets and businesses. The water finally crested at over 184 meters. Elsewhere in Chongqing, the Chongqing, a landmark building, was half submerged, and landslides had claimed the lives of 2 residents. Authorities with the local hydrological bureau reported that the inflow to the Three Gorges Dam had reached 60,000 cubic meters per second, prompting them to issue a yellow flood warning.
With southern China suffering unprecedented flooding this year, the safety of the Three Gorges Dam has caused a lot of attention. An expert says that the dam has worsened the flooding 25 times more than the natural situation.
The Yangtze River is flooding for the 3rd time during this year's monsoon season. On July 27, the Liberty Times reported that large portions of China were being battered again by torrential rains. Fearing that the Three Gorges Dam might burst, Chinese Communist Party officials ordered the release of water from its reservoir. The decision to save the dam has placed the lives of millions of downstream residents into jeopardy. They're still recovering from the previous 2 floods and are now swamped by new flooding of the Hua River and Taihu Lake. The continuing floods along the Yangtze River raise an important question. Why hasn't the Three Gorges Dam prevented the flooding? An expert familiar with the dam, Wei Lu Wang, said its primary purpose is to generate electricity. A secondary benefit should be flood control, but ongoing research suggests the dam has made the flooding 25 times worse than it might normally be.
After India announced its ban on the Chinese video sharing app Tik Tok, the ban has now spread internationally, including the United States, and the number of downloads of its competitors' apps has increased sharply. It seems that TikTok is besieged on all sides. Let's take a look.
The U.S. Congress this week introduced legislation to block federal employees from using TikTok on government-issued devices. The Trump administration's objective is to fully ban the use of TikTok. This is in fear that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is using TikTok to spy on unsuspecting American citizens. This past June, and in response to similar fears for their national security, India banned TikTok along with 58 other Chinese mobile apps. Then in July, they added an additional 47 Chinese apps to the list of potential spy tools. According to the market research firm Sensor Tower, India had been TikTok's largest market. As such, the combined ban by the U.S. and India wiped out 2/3 of TikTok's worldwide market. Creating further problems for TikTok, its 2 largest competitors, Raposo and Dubsmash, have been soaking up the market share it has been losing, suggesting it may never be as successful as it once was.
Obviously, the ban on TikTok and many other Chinese apps can only happen when the global tide is turning against the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. That is why in the past week, so many unprecedented events happened. The first one was, of course, the unprecedented move on the US side, that is, ordering the Chinese to close its consulate in Houston. The CCP soon retaliated by closing the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, China. I first heard the news of the closure of the CCP's consulate in Houston from the radio while I was driving on last Wednesday. When I heard that there was a fire inside the consulate, I thought the consulate staff were asked to evacuate only because of the fire. Frankly speaking, I didn't expect that the true story was just the opposite. The CCP received the closure order first, then they started to burn documents. Although I've been advocating for a world without the CCP, the news was still very surprising for me, as well as for many other Chinese overseas people, because for so many years it seemed nobody was willing to or dared to stand up against the CCP. The reason for the closure order, according to the US government, was, quote, to protect American intellectual property and Americans' private information, unquote. Senator Marco Rubio, the acting chairman of US Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, tweeted, quote, China's Houston consulate is a massive spy center. Forcing it to close is long overdue, unquote. Fox News reported that the CCP's consulate in Houston was targeted because of, in part, the CCP's targeting of U.S. energy firms. Fox Business quoted Asia analyst Gordon Zhang by saying that, quote, also, there are stories that this consulate had links with protest groups in the United States providing financial and logistic support. That's unconfirmed, but what is confirmed is that the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Communist Party's global ties have been engaged in a malicious disinformation campaign, deliberately stoking racial tensions in the US, and the US Customs has seized items coming from China this year that would be very handy for protesters. As far as I am concerned, all the above reasons could be possible. The consulate in Houston was the CCP's first consulate in the US. Through many years of operation, it had indeed become, quote, the central node of Communist Party's vast network of spies and influence operations in the United States, unquote, as Senator Marco Rubio has put it. As early as 2 years ago, when I covered the news of the arrest of Chinese professor Xie Keqiang of the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, I learned that FBI had been holding meetings with top leaders of Texas academic and medical institutions to warn about foreign threats to research and academic institutions. Xie Keqiang himself was one of the 4,180 experts recruited by China to return to the mainland and provide their expertise in what is called the 1,000 Tenants Plan. And the number 4,180 is just as of 2014. The CCP has stopped releasing new information and actually deleted the previous websites and information related to the 1,000 Tenants Plan after it was identified as a program to recruit scientists and researchers who can still take intellectual property from the US and other countries. I also learned from the local Chinese community that many Chinese professors and researchers hold positions in both the US and China. They travel between the two countries frequently, receiving salaries from both sides and taking research information and results, even patents they gather from the US to China, and got paid huge money for it. Back in 2008, CCP sent more than 12,000 red flags to Australia for the Chinese students in Australia to turn Canberra into a sea of red flags and to drown out Tibetan demonstrators and pro-democracy protesters. When the Beijing Olympic torch arrived in Australia's capital city, Canberra, the Chinese consulates in major Australian cities also organized big buses to transport the students from Sydney, Melbourne, and other cities to Canberra to offer them free lunch, free meals. I was at this thing that day. It was quite astonishing to see how those 10,000 hot-headed Chinese students who thought they were defending their dear motherland turned violent and even beat up those who disagree with them. The point here is, if the CCP could do this to Australia in 2008, one should not be surprised if they do something similar here in the US, such as offering some financial and logistical support to fuel the riots inside the US. Right after closure, an order for the CCP's consulate in Houston was issued. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo delivered a powerful and historic speech on China. Many Chinese people have been comparing it to Reagan's evil empire speech, as well as Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. Some call it Manifesto for the Elimination of the CCP. Some say that Secretary Pompeo has raised the rallying call for the extermination of the CCP. I also think this speech is a very important turning point. It feels like that the gloves have finally come off and the US has finally made up its mind regarding what the CCP really is and how to deal with it. For me, there are many important indications in Secretary Pompeo's speech. First of all, and the most important one, is that America has finally woken up from its non-illusions about the CCP and is seeing the CCP for what it is and speaking out loudly about it. I said in my previous program about the possible US travel ban on CCP members that treating the CCP like a normal political party is the biggest mistake the West made in the past 40 plus years when dealing with China. I was glad to hear Secretary Pompeo say the same thing about CCP's trading practice, companies, students, employees, and the People's Liberation Army. He recognized that all these are not normal practices, organizations, or personnel. The second indication of Secretary Pompeo's speech is that the US is now ready to call for a regime change. About 1 year ago, I was still in Washington, D.C. I covered a lot of events on US-China relations as a journalist at the US Congress, research institutes, and think tanks. At that time, I could feel that although many politicians were very sharp when criticizing the CCP, none were ready to talk about regime change. They carefully avoided touching this sensitive issue. They were just not ready yet, or the idea was too much. However, this time it was different. Although Secretary Pompeo didn't utter the word regime change, he has called for the Chinese people to, quote, change the CCP's behavior and hinted that free nations should work together with Chinese people to defend freedom. He also mentioned that, quote, we must also engage and empower the Chinese people, unquote. So we should not be surprised if one day there appears in China some other political parties or forces that openly declare that they don't recognize the CCP's legitimacy and call for an election, and the US may choose to support such a move. The third important aspect of Secretary Pompeo's speech is the declaration that the free world must triumph over this new tyranny. By saying this, Secretary Pompeo was asking nations and the public to make a choice between freedom and tyranny. The battle is indeed not a battle between two superpowers or two big countries for their own interests. It is a battle between freedom and tyranny, justice and evil, humanity and devil. And every single human being needs to make a choice. So what next after the gloves are off? There are several possibilities. 1. Closing more consulates. Both President Trump and U.S. Senator Ted Cruz have said that it is possible to close more CCP's consulates in the U.S. 2. Military confrontations in the South China Sea area. Territory disputes in the South China Sea is a long-existing problem, but until very recently, the international world showed little willingness to push back against the CCP's aggressive expansion in this area. On July 13th, Secretary Pompeo announced an important shift in U.S. declaratory policy on the South China Sea, which says, quote, Beijing's claims to offshore resources across most of the South China Sea are completely unlawful, as is its campaign of bullying to control them, unquote. Australia followed the suit on July 23rd and formally rejected CCP's territory and maritime claims in the South China Sea. Since then, the US, Australia, and Japan have conducted trilateral military exercises on the doorstep of the disputed South China Sea. US spy planes have edged dangerously close to CCP's maritime empire. Will all these moves create military conflicts in this area? Perhaps we can say anything is possible at such a time. 3. More sanctions. The US could also impose more sanctions on the CCP. A Chinese scholar even predicted that Trump could extend this sanction to his old friend Xi Jinping. As Trump already signed the Hong Kong sanctions bill, it is inevitable that more CCP leaders who were involved in the crackdown on Hong Kong's freedom will be sanctioned. Will Xi Jinping be also on the list? We'll have to wait and see. 4. Closer ties with Taiwan. After the closure of CCP's consulate in Houston, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz tweeted, quote, with the State Department's decision to close the Chinese consulate in Houston because it engaged in espionage and IP theft, the city now has a consulate for the Free Republic of China, Taiwan, and no consulate for the tyrannic People's Republic of China, as it should be, unquote. While the U.S. is close to having an all-out confrontation with the CCP, we can surely expect that it will enhance and strengthen its relationship with Taiwan. Some Chinese netizens are saying that Taiwan or the Republic of China should take back China from the CCP. In the past few decades, whenever somebody did something that the CCP didn't like, you could surely expect news titles such as "This could anger China" or "China threatens retaliation," etc., as if we should really be very fearful because this would anger China or China will retaliate. However, this time, when the US is close to calling the CCP an illegal government, what has the CCP done? Very little, or virtually nothing. Sure enough, they have chopped the name of Secretary Pompeo's China policy advisor Miles Yu's name from the Hall of Fame of Yongchuan Middle School in Chongqing, China, as the top student of that year. They have put up posters in Beijing to teach people how to get into the underground air defense facilities after alarms go off. They have also put up a pre-combat evacuation drill in Shanghai on July 27th, etc. But the CCP was quick to say that the drill in Shanghai was just a routine drill that happens every year, and it had nothing to do with preparing for a war. So far, apart from some verbal threats and a reciprocal move of closing the US consulate in Chengdu, it seems that the most substantial retaliation of the CCP so far was to remove the name of Secretary Pompeo's China policy advisor from the honorable list of a middle school in China. The latest action of the CCP is its Foreign Minister Wang Yi's call for regional dialogue, peace, and cooperation. Obviously, the CCP is not ready for war, and they are just creating some kind of atmosphere of war inside China to terrify the public, to incite anti-American sentiment, and to divert public attention from the real problems. However, to really achieve the goal that the free world must triumph over the new tyranny, there are some serious obstacles or challenges for the US to overcome. First of all, as Secretary Pompeo has put it, unlike the Soviet Union, China is deeply integrated into the global economy. The USSR was closed off from the free world. Communist China is already within our borders. I said something similar 2 years ago in my article, What Kind of Media Do We Need to Battle a Modern-Day Trojan War? I said, quote, although the US might not have a strategy about how to deal with the post-Cold War China, the CCP did have a strategy as to how to launch a modern-day Trojan War to silently invade the world. How deeply has the CCP as well as communist ideology infiltrated our society? One can hardly tell, but just look at those politicians, scholars, China experts, lobbyists for Wall Street, for big companies, who always defend the CCP so eagerly when someone tries to criticize it. We should know that to cleansing the CCP's elements from inside our societies is a very challenging task. Another challenging is, as many young people in the West know very little of the CCP's evil nature and its history of killing, they feel attracted by socialist ideology without knowing that according to what the CCP has always been saying, the socialism is the primary stage of communism and will inevitably lead to communism. So for the free world to win this battle, it is very important to educate and inform our young generations. I highly recommend 2 books and my own memoir, which are all about exposing the evil nature and the killing history of the CCP as well as worldwide communist movements. The 2 books are 9 commentaries on the Communist Party, How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World. The title of my memoir is Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom and Falun Gong. When it was first published in 2005, a Sydney Morning Herald book review said this book should be compulsory reading for politicians and journalists. Later, the president of the Society of Women Writers New South Wales in Australia said that I challenge you all to read this book. It should be compulsory reading for the younger generation. I'm not here saying how wonderful my book is. I mention this because the authors of the book reviews must have also realized how important it was for politicians, journalists, and the younger generation to learn the truth, the ugly reality of living in a communist country. Unless enough people have been awakened from illusions about the CCP and socialism, it will be very difficult to win this battle, and the CCP could turn around and come back with some new tricks. Therefore, we must continue with our fight until we win. Okay, that's all for today. Truth can indeed save lives, no matter how inconvenient it is. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Thank you. See you next time.